Do you think rock and roll is dead?
Oh, I think it stopped evolving. And I think it's not just rock and not just music, but a lot of forms of art that have suddenly stopped evolving. And I've heard people talk about some of them, but I've never heard anybody connect the dots. I haven't heard anybody talk about the actual cause of it, and I haven't heard a solution. And it's funny. I don't know. I might have both. And I know that sounds like really immodest, right? But this is after a lot of fucking research and talking with people in every artistic industry, from high ups to low downs. And I'm kind of shocked that it took me this long to like realize what it might be. So okay, let's look at like rock and roll, right? Like every decade has seen a dramatic shift in the sound of rock and roll. You look at like blues, where rock and roll came out of at the turn of the century in Mississippi, up through the 40s, the 50s, all totally different. The 60s, my God, the 70s, nobody'd ever heard anything like that before on earth. The 80s, totally new sounds came out. The 90s, from hair bands to grunge rock to Radiohead, that stuff hit us like thunder. And then it just stopped in like 1999, roughly. And there's been some really cool bands since then, but almost no one's doing anything new. You listen to, this is evidenced by, you listen to like a modern rock station, and at least half their songs are from the 90s. That's 30 years ago. When I was a kid listening to modern rock stations in the 90s, they were playing the exact same music they play now. And they didn't play stuff from the 80s on the same station, let alone the 70s or the 60s. Heck, they usually didn't play stuff from the previous year because there was so much new, cool stuff coming out every week in the 90s. And it's not just rock that has stopped. I grew up loving hardcore punk music. There's a lot of great hardcore bands out there right now that I listen to, that I love, but they don't really sound much different from the ones in the 90s. I do see some very interesting things happening with rap now, I'll say that. But by and large, what happened to music in the year 2000, that's when people could suddenly build their own like home studios for a very small budget, relatively. And then the studios became digital. Suddenly anyone could have $1 million studio at their fingertips. And everyone, me included, thought, awesome. All this artistic talent that, the music industry, that the big studios had been holding back, will finally have a voice, will finally find their audience. But no, it didn't happen. It just stopped evolving. And here's the thing, it's not just rock. It's not just music. I mean, look at fashion, right? Like fashion, like for every decade has been changing. Like, I don't know, back to like the 1700s, really. And like even as recently, like if you were in the 1990s, middle 1990s, walking down a street dressed like somebody from the 1980s, you better be on your way to a Halloween party. But nowadays, look at us. I mean, we don't really dress any different than the 90s. Again, 30 years ago, hairstyles are the same. Clothes are more or less the same. It stopped evolving. And not just music and fashion, but I can argue it happened with art and literature too. And look at film. For sure, there's been some great films since 2000. But think of No Country for Old Men, for example, or Gravity. Truly great films. But not compared to the quantity and quality of great original films of every decade before the year 2000. They changed cinema, they changed storytelling itself, right? So what happened in the year 2000? The internet, and then cell phones. And we stopped daring to be bored. Suddenly we had instant entertainment, instant gratification, instead of yearning and longing, forcing ourselves to kill healthy boredom by creating something. And so by and large, we stopped inventing, stopped evolving, stopped dreaming. And I don't want to be one of those dudes saying, oh yeah, tablets and smartphones are the end of civilization, but they might be. You know, as I point out in the full-length version of the Diesel music video we shot, art is what remains of a civilization after it collapses, as all civilizations will. You know, militaries collapse, governments collapse, art lets us live on. And what does this say about us as a civilization if we've already written our last chapter? You know, barring an environmental or military apocalypse, does anyone see us ever like unplugging and daring to dream again? If we don't, as a species, I don't think we're not gonna innovate thought, language, story, art. If we keep like vanquishing our time with screen time, then all we're driving forward is technology, which without empathy is just the end of the world. But if we simply take time to unplug, to be alone with our own hearts and thoughts, the scary thing, right? And make them our entertainments, our artistic evolution, indeed our very empathy maybe, might flourish into something we can't imagine. And yes, the irony that I'm spreading this message through YouTube is not lost on me. But yeah, I dare everybody to shut this off, to sit alone with your thoughts. Doesn't matter where you are. A small room, the perfect place to stare into nothing and dream.